I'm going to add a little more spice to it because here's a gentleman who was a naval aviator for 10 years and then wound up becoming a CPA, a guy that lives in the world of numbers. And I have a suspicion that numbers were a part of the whole world of you and naval aviation. So tell us a bit about that and
Sure,
how it then all tied into you after your service to our nation. And again, thank you for your service.
sure.
How that worked out for you to go, yeah, I was a naval aviator, and guess what? I love numbers, and I am now going to go into this world of accounting. Welcome to another episode of The Champion Dentist. I'm Mike Kulwiec, and with me today is Mr. Morgan Hamon, and he is a CPA by trade, but the early part of his career was in naval aviation as a fighter pilot. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about that, but he is an expert in accounting, specifically dental accounting. I love what he and his firm are up to. So, Morgan, welcome. Well, I'm delighted to have you join us today.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. I'm real happy to be here.
Well, Morgan, let's get into that history that you have because it's
Sure.
very rare that an individual has the privilege of meeting a former naval aviator, actually was in combat, did training. You're a Top Gun guy, and so that's really cool. And I know that our viewers today would love to hear a little bit about that, but I'm going to add a little more spice to it because here's a gentleman who was a naval aviator for 10 years and then wound up becoming a CPA, a guy that lives in the world of numbers. And I have a suspicion that numbers were a part of the whole world of you and naval aviation. So tell us a bit about that and
Sure,
how it then all tied into you after your service to our nation. And again, thank you for your service.
sure.
How that worked out for you to go, yeah, I was a naval aviator, and guess what? I love numbers, and I am now going to go into this world of accounting. So tell us more about that.
Well, all of my family, it's definitely ingrained in our DNA. So my dad is a career CPA, my brother, my cousins. So it's definitely in our family. In college, I was the rebel. And although I took accounting classes and I was a business major in college, the Navy paid for my university. I was on a Navy ROTC scholarship, and I wanted one thing. I wanted to be a Navy fighter pilot. So I thought, I'll never be an accountant because I want to do this. And so I was the rebel. And I went and did that. The day I graduated college, I got commissioned as an officer, was off to flight training and was fortunate to do well and get selected for tactical carrier aviation. I was an F-18 pilot, a West Coast guy. Did an operational tour over to the Persian Gulf, Iraq. Afterwards, I stayed on as a flight instructor on the F-18 for 4 years. And that brought me to about the 10-year mark and had to make some decisions. Do we stay in or move on? All of my friends, well, most of my friends went to the airlines, and they're all very senior captains these days. And a few of us chose private industry, and that just seemed like more of a fit for myself.
Mhm.
And so when I left the Navy, I had a little more practical outlook on life, I think, with a few kids and a family to support. And so my aspirations changed, and I went back to school, got a master's degree in accounting, sat for the CPA exam, and essentially the timing worked out that I did a startup with my dad, who's a career CPA, and we built what would come to be known as HD Accounting Group, and then last year we combined with Eisner Amper when my dad retired. So a couple things there. Real privileged to build a successful business with your dad. Not everybody gets to do that. That was really special, and it was a good fit for me because in the Navy I learned, you're a young guy trying to do well, trying to stay alive. Quite honestly, you get really focused on what you're learning, what you're doing, but you don't realize all these amazing gifts, all these lessons you get taught along the way. The first is leadership. In college, we're groomed to be naval officers first. And that involves very extensive leadership training. And I viewed that as that, hey, this is something I need to do to be a pilot, but you don't realize how valuable that training is. And then when I got into operations with the Navy, you're not just a pilot, you have collateral responsibilities, operations officer, training officer, landing signal officer. So I had a lot of different jobs. And what we learn is we learn a lot from those, how to operate large, complex organizations. We learn about standardization, right? Which is how you make large, complex operations work with varying skill levels of people needed to make the whole enterprise happen. Really valuable. Again, at the time, I was just doing what I needed to do to do well. But the
Right,
incredible lessons learned.
right.
Learned about compartmentalization, focusing on one thing at a time. We all have to multitask, but sometimes you need to compartmentalize. So just amazing lessons learned through that process, and it led well into my career as a CPA. But to go back to the beginning and answer your question, I guess it was just inescapable with the family, the family business, and what we all do because we're all CPAs.
Well, I would think that as a naval aviator, as a pilot, math is a big part of what you're doing there, right?
Yes.
And so that numbers orientation, you may have grown up around numbers, but you've got to know well beyond 2 + 2 = 4
You did
to
have to
be
be very good.
successful in that world, correct?
You had to be good at math in real time flying. When you're flying a jet, you're moving at 9 miles a minute. You have to anticipate. Back when I was flying, it wasn't as computerized as it is now, and
Yeah,
you had to do a lot of math in your head when you're doing radial intercepts for instrument approaches, and you have to know, when to configure your airplane, always thinking ahead because moving at 9 miles a minute, you have to be thinking way out in advance, and you're doing a lot of math. Fuel planning with the F-18 was always a little fuel limited, which can get critical at the ship.
yeah.
So you do a lot of numbers.
Well,
And
number and what's interesting to me when it comes to what you just said is not only you had this background in numbers, but you also had a really strong grounding in leadership and in
yes,
organization, and if you will, in running something.
yes.
And I think that that has come over to your unique approach and how your firm handles accounting for dentists. And I know that in our coaching of dental practices throughout the United States, what do we routinely run into? We run into a dental practice where they do have someone doing their accounting, but it's just an income statement. And
Hmm.
it could be once a month, once a quarter, once a year. And there's not a lot of analysis that's done. And one of the things that I like about what you do, and we'll talk about it today, is that you provide analysis as part of your routine service. It's where we're going to do your numbers, doc. We're going to handle your books. And I love how you approach it. And it's ideal because it's about as hands off as you can get
Yeah,
for the doctor, which I think doctors want. They don't want to have to worry about posting things and transferring things and scanning things, and you minimize that, which is wonderful. But there's three components to what you do, which is that monthly bookkeeping and income statement. But then also there's analysis, and you've got about 1,000 clients, 1,000 dental
it
practices. That's a great data set. So a
is.
CPA, God, with all due respect to them, who's got a practice, they don't have the data set that you have access to. And that they don't mean to be, if you will, a disservice to their clients, but to have access to that is extremely valuable. So to me, that's a big deal. And of course, tax planning is a really important aspect as well. Doctors don't want to be shocked. And,
No.
and I think the additional point before we get into subject number one, which is profitability and the
Hmm.
profit levels and profit levers is, from your perspective, is doctors aren't trained in dental school to be business managers, to be leaders, and we certainly are very supportive of them on how you get there with that. But they're also not automatically comfortable with numbers. They may have had math as part of college and dental school, but they're not really in school trained to really want to take a look at a financial statement and for that matter, even
Yeah.
understand it. So these are things that are very important to me. I know they're important to you because why in the world would a business owner want to operate blind? You know,
Right.
you whether you're flying a jet or driving a car, you got to look through the windshield. Well, how fast am I going? Where am I going? All of that. Well, knowing your numbers is going to tell you are we on course or not. So with that in mind, let's get into subject number one. You know,
Sure.
we want to take a look at profit, and then we also want to take a look in our time today at the subject of associate dentists, whether they are working for you or become partners in your firm. So let's start
Yeah.
with this whole world of profit level levers, and how do you see these key components of profitability in a dental practice?
Sure. And to start, I'll lay out, what our overall objective is with our dentists. And I think you're exactly right. In the accounting world, CPAs tend to be very tax oriented. And when we formed our company, we had a different vision. We wanted to be high tech, high touch, niche firm. We very quickly found our way into the dental space. It was a great fit, and we stayed there. But I think about it the other way. Tax is important, but why do we own businesses in the first place? And we speak very personally to this, to have some control over our destiny, to make a nice living and build what should be an appreciating asset over time. And for all of that to happen, you have to have adequate profit. So let's start there, right? And given that's where we're going to start, we have to think about our deliverable. Our dentists did not learn accounting in school, and they're not regular financial statement users, and the background just isn't there with dentists to understand the entire financial accounting picture, which includes the balance sheet and the income statement and how they relate. And they're not supposed to know that. And so that is why our core deliverable, our practice profitability analysis, is written in their language. And it is exactly like you said, it's the dashboard. You have to know where you're going, what matters, so that you can actually see it and understand it, to know what your profit margin is, and then what could make it better if we're not happy with it, or we just think there's opportunities, because we're always interested in more profit. So that's where we start, is let's make money first, have that in the forefront, and then after we've made a very nice living, which would be the goal, very 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 satisfying living, then we can go to work on proper tax avoidance and the tax compliance that's necessary. But I think it goes in that order, not the other way around.
Right.
So that's where we are coming from. If we think about profit, um, and the way I explain it to our doctors is this: like, we just think about the profit equation. What is that? It is net income over revenue, and net income is revenue minus expenses. So what are our two variables? Expenses and revenue. So break it down that way. And we can start with expenses. If, to your point earlier, right, driving, knowing where you're going, I think, well, I know this is true. I've heard it. A lot of dentists and even small business owners in any industry, they can end up managing their business by just logging into their bank account, how much money is in the bank account. Well, if we start giving the dentist information, and of course we're interested in increasing profit. If profit is low, or maybe they're just feeling it with cash flow, I think the default go-to assumption is, well, where am I overspending? Why is my overhead high? So I think expenses on the income statement is definitely the first stop for anybody to say, how can I do better? And that's important to look at. Now, the way we present the expenses is all the categories pertinent to a dental practice. So the variable costs, clinical supplies, lab fees, ortho implant supplies, staff costs. We're going to display those fixed costs, rent, other expenses. We're going to benchmark those and show our clients, here's how your expenses are trending as a percentage of income. And here's over 1,000 other practices just like yours in the same trailing 3-month time period. So it's very dynamic. And we can do that to identify outliers on cost, to really zero in, in that very finite time we have to be CEOs of our business. We can zero in purposely on what actually matters. And if expenses are high, we can address that. And so that is often the first stop. That's what we show very clearly color coded to say, look, we might want to look here. The other lever of profitability, if we just look at the numbers, is the revenue. And when I think of revenue, we can break it into two, revenue and collections, and they sound similar, but they're very different. Revenue is just the amount of money coming in. And so, one thing we have to consider, where are we in that business life cycle? If it's a startup and you're at month 3, very likely you don't have enough revenue to have a reasonable profit margin, and that's okay. It's not until the business matures and we're at a point where there is adequate revenue to realize an appropriate profit margin. Also on the revenue, we have to think about our fee schedule. Has that been updated? Are we charging market rates? Have we really taken a hard look at, do we want to keep certain insurance plans where the reimbursement rate is just totally unrealistic and they're not willing to budge? Are we charging what the dentist is worth as a clinician, what their office is worth? So do we have enough revenue coming in to begin with? So that's on the revenue side. If we want to get granular, and this gets a little out of my lane and more into a consulting lane, but is all the treatment being booked? Is it being booked? If a hygienist does fluoride, did they put that into the software so we can bill it and collect it? Is all the coding right for what you're charging for? There's a lot of internal things that need to be done in the practice just to make sure you're billing correctly.
Let me interject a quick point here, Morgan.
Sure.
What you're pointing out, and I think you used this word when you're talking about your naval experience, is systems.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have systems, procedures, SOPs.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is not a thing where you go to dental school and you graduate and here's your operating manual. And I like to say that dentistry is the practice in and of itself, whether it's 1 million or 5 million, it's still a small business.
Mm-hmm.
What I see it as, though, is it's a complex small business, right?
Yes.
If I have a food truck, okay, that's a small business. But if I have a Chipotle, that becomes a more complicated small business, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
complexity to it. So what you're really underlining by going into this world of identifying what's happening with hygiene and making sure the revenue is getting booked appropriately is there's complexity here. It's not as simple as someone might think. Back to you, sir.
Well, I agree with that fully. And when we get into complexity, if we move from revenue to collections, this is where I see the most challenges arise if profit isn't where we'd like to all see it. And that is where there are breakdowns in the collection process, whether that's submitting claims, making sure that your payment policies are being enforced at the front desk, making sure statements are being sent out, efforts are made to collect. We have to make sure that that collection actually happens. And that does require even more complexity, as you pointed out, because the world of insurance is complex. It gets out of my lane. Not all business owners, small business owners have to deal with that, but our clients certainly do. And if a doctor comes, let's say they buy a practice and they may not know how that billing should work. And if they're completely dependent on an employee to do this and they're just hoping that it's done, but they don't have an adequate controls in place or just the knowledge, that can go sideways in a hurry. And Mike, I can tell I've heard so many stories over the years where that collection process breaks down and that will drop a profit margin faster than just about anything else and create cash emergencies. And so we like to shine a light on that and by asking for accounts receivable aging data, so we can hopefully help be a second set of eyes to say, we have some older receivables that are growing in balance, maybe growing disproportionately to revenue. Probably need to look at that so that we can triage that collection process before it turns into a bigger problem. Now, how do we do all this? Well, you touched on it. Okay, let's think about that dentist. They just started a practice or maybe bought a large office, and there's a lot of things going on. And to be, in my opinion, to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to know how to scale the business, which means that the dentist can't do everything, right? They have to be able to delegate. And that's when standardization, as you pointed out, comes into place. You have to have processes that are effective, that are repeatable, that you can train and you can monitor to make that happen, without consuming all the doctor's time that's much better spent in the operatory. And we do that through SOPs and manuals and training. So you can see here where we end up talking accounting, but with those if we're having a substantive discussion on accounting, it inevitably will relate to operational topics.
So that term, as you've described it, is revenue cycle management. And there are firms out there that will help dentists, with RCM. They'll handle the billing and the collection, which I think for some practices makes a great deal of sense. And we're now in a world we're outsourcing things that maybe didn't make sense 10 or 20 years ago. I think they
Mhm.
make more and more sense today. Can you comment on that? The value of a practice relying on outside entities to help
Yes.
them with the operational aspect of their practice?
Yes, and I think it's quite common, particularly when it comes to billing and
Mhm.
collection. We'll see that outsourced, and of course, there's a cost. They'll take a few points, but I think it's well spent if the doctor just needs that time. We can outsource this. It's complex. It needs to happen, but there's only so much that perhaps that doctor can handle. I think it makes sense to delegate and outsource a very critical function. In my opinion, collecting money, there's no higher administrative function in any business. If you're not going to collect, like, what are we doing in the first place? So, I think it makes sense to outsource that. We see it often. Now, that's, I'm just speaking just my opinion here. I don't have a data point to connect this to, but my opinion is it's typically temporary. And by temporary, it could mean a period of years. Most practices is that as the business matures, as the doctor's skill set as the CEO gets better, right? And when it gets better, they might find that they've successfully delegated elsewhere. They might have some more time. It's common then to see the billing and insurance, that process being brought back in-house at a later date when the owner perhaps has some more bandwidth to manage that internally, and then they can save them, that 3% or whatever they're paying for that. But I think it makes sense if a practice, particularly a startup or a newer practice owner, let's just face it, like their bucket is full and we need to make sure money's being collected, then by all means outsource it and get it done. And then focus on what other operational priorities there are to make sure that the practice is successful.
So Morgan, you mentioned to me that in addition to expense control and revenue control, you also mentioned the word leadership to me, that is an
Yes.
important component to profitability of a practice. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I connected those dots a few years ago because I get asked a lot of questions from our doctors. Um, what people want to know is, okay, if you have 1,000 clients out there, like the clients that are doing really well, like what is it? And a lot of times the question will arise from a question about either specialty or geography. Like, well, Morgan, we have clients all 50 states. They'll say, more, what's the hot areas? If I'm going to open a practice, where should I open it? Where is everybody doing really well? In my opinion is, and I had came to this realization a few years ago after hearing this question so many times that, look, geography, it's not geography. One of our very long-term clients, still a client, been a client since almost the whole time. She's in San Francisco. It is one of the most expensive places on earth. Routinely has had a 50% plus profit margin. This is not geography. We have clients in rural areas where the doctor to patient ratio is very favorable and they're struggling. So I don't think it's geography. I don't think it's specialty.
You think it's leadership?
It's absolutely leadership. And that's where I came to this opinion, having a lot of conversations and a lot of clients I've got to know really well over the years. And I see their numbers and I said, well, I don't know how to quantify this with data, but I can tell you this. when I'm looking at a practice profitability analysis and it's perfect, and I know they're making a very nice living, and I also know through conversations with them that they have very high quality of life. Sometimes that is time. A really good friend of mine, who I'm actually talking to in an hour appointment, he works 24 hours a week and makes seven figures.
Hmm.
And that's success. So it's not always money, it's a combination of money and time. But the common thread is that these dentists I'm talking to, I know they're good leaders. And that's a subjective opinion of mine. I'm just talking with them. But I know they're clearly they're amazing clinicians, but they're the type of business owner that inspires their staff. The staff like working there. They obviously the patients, we it could be a whole separate topic of just case acceptance and what, how they're presenting that. They're obviously really good at that. And I like to say that they're playing with a stacked deck. They got the whole package, right? They're really good leaders. They inspire people, and they know how to hold people accountable, but it's still in an environment where people want to be.
Well, you bring up a point that is really essential to the success of any dental practice. And certainly that's why I created my company, TriVantage, and one of our divisions is the Champion Dentist. And we consult and coach. We help that dentist get from here to the top of the mountain.
Mhm.
Well, that journey to the top of the mountain is driven by leadership. Like you said, whether they're in rural Nebraska or downtown San Francisco, the business model of dentistry is fairly, if you will, generic. You know,
Yes.
there are different ways doctors position themselves. But the question is, how do you lead that practice? How do you manage that practice? And unfortunately, again, doctors are at a disadvantage because, unlike you, as a future naval aviator, when you were going through schooling, you learned leadership. And that's a wonderful part of our nation's military is they understand what leadership means. They understand
Yes.
what being part of a team means. And there's much that we can learn in terms of the success of our military. Now, one of the things that I will tell you to pick up on your point on leadership is the first thing we look at in my company is the doctor, him or herself.
Hmm.
Where are they coming from? What is their mindset? How is life for them right now? We might come in at a time in their life where, boy, there's a huge amount of stress.
Hmm.
And usually that huge amount of stress relates to either what's going on in the practice or outside of the practice or both, but they tend to feed each other. If there's problems at home, it's going to come over into the practice. If there's problems in the practice, it's going to affect the home.
Hmm.
The fact, in my opinion, is I think most marriages break up because of money
Hmm.
before there is a problem with romance. Well, romance is driven by people feeling safe. So
Hmm.
if there's a financial challenge, boy, that can really affect the relationship. So one of the things that to pick up on your point that what doctors really need to accept is, hey, I wasn't trained in this. And that's okay. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. The important thing is to reach out, whether it's to people like me and my company, get advice from you and others, Morgan. But the fact is, you don't have to go to school to get an MBA. It's like kind of like the last thing you want to do in order to become a good leader of a dental practice. You simply need to understand these are the core fundamentals, and it starts with your values and your vision and how you communicate with people. It's important how you communicate with patients. Well, guess
Hmm.
what? It's just as important, if not more so, than how you communicate with your team. And these
Yes.
are all things that I think you probably got great grounding in going back to your military experience. Does that sound right to you?
It sounds absolutely spot on. And I will share when I reflect and say, well, what was the most valuable lesson my Navy experience gave me? I'll tell you, it is the ability to just have unabashed introspection on what's happening. So, and I'll give some detail there. In flight school, we were trained to be a single seat aviator. So like the F-18 I flew, there's one seat. It's just you. And so during training, you think about, you see the movies, Top Gun and that, and so you think that there's these big attitudes and everyone's just sort of kind of carefree and just winging it, and that is not the case. Attitudes are not tolerated. Just from right at the very beginning, there's no excuses. And as you're going through that training, it's difficult. And it was later in training the light bulb came on. Okay, why is it this way? It's because when you're in that jet by yourself, the weather is bad, the everything's really difficult, and you have to make it happen. Look, if the problem is you, you have to fix it. So if anything seems like you're getting behind in the cockpit, I always say the first place you look is in the mirror. We had mirrors around the canopy. You look in the mirror. If you're behind, you better fix it. You better self-diagnose that and fix it right now, or you're not going to live to see tomorrow. And that's not an exaggeration. And so that mindset, if anything's going sideways, I need to look at myself first. That is incredibly valuable in business. So in my business, if say something goes sideways, we'll diagnose. Do we have, and I'll always look first, inside first. Do we have a bad procedure? Did we not provide adequate training? Have we provided adequate training, but we have not had adequate accountability? And then we'll break it all the way down to where, okay, maybe we've checked all these boxes. I think the client is maybe confused or has expectations that we need to like convey, because maybe we didn't actually convey adequate expectations. Yet you have to diagnose that and then fix things instantly. All right. And I think there is some human nature to be defensive. I think everybody can always work on that. But you have to just look and say, this didn't happen. It's a leadership problem. It is. And as a business owner, Mike, you and I know this. When you own a business, everything's your problem. Like you have to fix it.
Well,
And
it's well said, and you just used a word that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on,
sure.
and that's the word training.
Yes.
And having developed multiple businesses from scratch, both distribution and manufacturing, and I've made every mistake under the sun. My dad used to say, wisdom is a summation of experience, mostly your mistakes.
Hmm.
You learn more from what went wrong than what went right. The important point is to learn, right?
Yes.
Going back to dentistry, and I see this in small business in general, training tends to be looked at as an afterthought.
Hmm.
And a lot of small business owners, they're very willing, as are banks, to borrow money, right? To loan you money to buy a piece of equipment because it's not going to walk out.
Hmm.
It's going to get depreciated. The bank can always repossess it if it's large enough. And so it's easier for business owners to say, yeah, I'm going to make that investment, be it 10,000 or 100,000. Whereas that investment in people, be it 10,000 or 100,000, becomes much more amorphous and difficult because it's, well, wait, the person, they may not learn, they may not last, they might be gone.
Hmm.
And this to me goes back to we look at the success of a Navy pilot, of our military, if it were not for this incredible discipline of focus in training
Hmm.
and systems, it would not have the success that it does. So I would think that there's a lot that you got exposed to in your naval career that has come over into your world as a quasi business advisor in the ownership of your practice. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about training, and I'll reflect back on a Navy experience. When you're on the flight deck ready to launch off the front of the ship, that it's a 40,000 pound jet, and that sequence is very consequential. Now, also on the flight deck, you're surrounded by a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds. And let's face it, we all know some 19 and 20-year-olds. And they are executing functions. It's literally life or death. And again, at the time, I was operating in this environment, I didn't necessarily appreciate it. I didn't really appreciate how good the Navy is at this. Let's take this high school graduate, no formal education, through standardized training. Let's equip them with the knowledge to do this very important job, qualify them, and then supervise them so that this symphony of coordination can happen on the flight deck. And as you're getting ready to launch, I'm seeing 20-year-old guys down there doing their procedures, hitting the button, and then we're launching off. And again, I didn't appreciate that as much as I should have at the time, but it really dawned on me when I became a business owner. We have to do the same thing. We have to break these people in an organization. We have to standardize. We have to look at what's our expectations. We have to memorialize those with standardized procedures, which, by the way, are very adaptive. If a procedure breaks, fix it tomorrow, retrain, and then you can enable people and let, empower people who are smart and have some aptitude to do their thing and do it well. And then it doesn't take so much of your time, so you can focus on other areas, and that's how we can scale and make our businesses bigger. So for me, from the Navy, it was that learning the power of standardization, and then coupling that with just a very high level of accountability. I owe a lot of my success to those
Morgan,
lessons.
you just used a word that's really essential to the operating system that we at TriVantage and the Champion Dentist that we provide to dentists, um, is this concept of having a leadership team that
Hmm.
is healthy and functional and cohesive, that understands the importance of two words: discipline and accountability.
Hmm.
Now, that may sound kind of militaristic, and yeah, in a military sense, yeah, everybody understands that. You got to have discipline and accountability.
Yes.
But guess what? Guess what? That's true if you play on a NCAA basketball team. You want to
Hmm.
win the national championship, there's discipline and accountability. You want to
Absolutely.
have a happy, healthy, functioning family, there's discipline and accountability.
Hmm.
And I think for a lot of business owners, they can struggle in their business because they're not comfortable with accountability. And they wind up creating a culture where there's a lack of accountability, and it holds the practice back, it holds the business back.
Hmm.
So one of the things that we really focus on is helping the leader, the dentist, and then their key team
Hmm.
to really understand, hey, if you want to win, if you want to have fun,
Hmm.
then there's got to be an open and honest environment where people are willing to be held accountable, where there is a discipline, where we are looking at the numbers, and we do it in a way, and there's a cadence to how we train a dental office to have a meeting where there's open and honest communication about the numbers. And what it does, it creates a culture that is one of positive, not negative.
Hmm.
And what will hold a lot of dental practices back is simply the culture was never established with a
Right.
clear sense of, hey, here's our values, here's what we live by, here's where we're going. We help practices do that. And then we help the doctor understand, starting with him or her first,
Hmm.
their own personal discipline and accountability. I've had clients where they've had some challenge getting to work on time. Well, guess what? That's going to affect your entire team. It's going to mess up the whole
It,
day.
it
So,
does. It
yeah.
reminds me of one thing I remember from the Navy is what they tell you as leader. You don't realize, if you don't realize it, you need to become aware of this quickly, is that when you are in your leadership position, you are under the microscope at all the time. All your subordinates, they're always watching you. They're listening to you. Everything you do is being paid attention to. And so when you're at work in that leadership role, you have to be very mindful. If something's really frustrating, you can't just lose it, for the lack of a better term. You must stay composed. You have to be that steady leader, because you are always under the microscope. And I don't think, if you've not had leadership training, that you might not understand that. How you behave at the office sets that tone, that culture that you just mentioned.
Well,
And
I think you're 100% right. One of the things that we teach is to a dental practice is be a good parent. And what does that mean? What's a good mom or dad? A good mom or dad, there may be some emotion at time, but that emotion is going to come and go.
yeah.
There's not going to be a loss of respect. There's not going to be a demeaning set of words. And it's over, it's done with. It's all part of this culture of discipline and accountability. There's just a few rules, and we live up to the rules. And when there's a problem, we're going to deal with it together. And that same sense of safety that you feel as a child in a healthy family, a healthy mom and dad relationship, where, yeah, I better clean my room because there's a consequence. I don't like it when mom or dad's upset, but you
Mhm.
also know that they love me and they're fair.
Mhm.
They're firm and fair, but they also love me. That same sense is what we also want when it comes to work. We want
Right.
to feel that, right?
Mhm.
And so we just have to remember in the operation of our small businesses, just be a good parent. What is it? Same thing that applies to being a good parent is what you want to do in the operation of your business. Does that make sense to you, sir?
It makes total sense. Absolutely. As leaders, we set the tone, just whether you're, leading your family or your business. I think that's a great analogy. One thing that frustrated me in the Navy was it was very difficult to affect change because that standardization was so important. If something needed tweaked or modified, the bureaucracy to impact that change became a little frustrating. And so I found that very liberating with my own business
To,
that
to, to not have anybody tell you, well, it's not in the
no,
rule book.
this is broken. I'm fixing it now. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tolerate things that are broken. But along this topic of leadership, I've always told my team, if you have an idea on this procedure to make it more efficient, more effective, or it just makes the quality of what you're doing in the day better, right? If it's a positive, like speak up and we will listen to that. And we practice that. If one of our team has a good idea to improve something, you'll be amazed if you listen to that, and again, only if you agree with it, but yes, that will make it better, and you put that in place tomorrow, and the staff knows they're being heard and they have buy-in and they're contributing to make the organization better. I think that's very, very powerful. So I always have encouraged my team to let me know what your good ideas are, and and I always viewed that as um, is really good leadership, and I've practiced that, and it's had some really tangible benefits. And I can imagine a dental practice, it's the same thing because the doctor's not
Yeah.
always sitting there and knowing how every procedure's playing out all
I
every day.
think I think that one of the challenging thing for clinicians, for doctors, is they are there doing dentistry. They have a
Yes.
team. They're not. If you're the coach of a basketball team, you're watching your players. You see what's going on in practice. You see what's going on in the game. In dental practice, that's not the case. And so that need to develop a strong team, to have the right people in the right seats, to have values that you guys live and breathe, those are really, really important. There's two critical components that I see, Morgan, and one is people, right people in the right seats, and
Mhm.
the other is data. You've got to know what the score is, not just at the end of the game, but where are we as we go through this game? And there's got to be a cadence to how you are playing the game so that you're able to take the time out in between quarters at halftime, whenever it is, so that you are able to say, yeah, you know what, we're doing well, or you know what, Morgan, you've got three fouls. You're on the verge of being out of the game here, buddy. Right?
Right.
And it's like, do you understand that? You care about the team. You love the team. You now know, look, I'm going to have to hold back here, or maybe the coach is going to put me on the bench for a bit, but you don't want to fall out because you're a starter. You're an important player to the team. Boy, in a dental practice, the last thing that practice wants is for somebody to foul out. Literally, I mean, literally to be in a position where they have to go elsewhere, Sometimes that is necessary because they're just not the right person. They shouldn't have joined the organization to begin with. We have a whole approach to help prevent that from happening. It's so interesting, Morgan. Here we are. You are a former aviator, became a CPA. You live in this world of numbers, but we've spent a really big chunk of our time today, talking about the importance of people, the doctor, him or herself. What is their mindset? What is their orientation? And
Mhm.
they've got to have this balance between li living in the world of numbers, being comfortable with the numbers, and at the same time also being present in this world of people. So there's a balancing act that's got to be done day in, day out in the operation of any small business, in particular in a dental practice, between people and numbers. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I think if we were to tie this to the beginning of the discussion, if we our three levers of profitability, managing expense, managing revenue, and leadership, by executing a lot of these ideas you and I have been discussing regarding leadership, that we're doing that ultimately so that those critical functions on whether it's purchasing, right, and managing costs, whether it's collection, that's what ultimately we're after, is for those to happen effectively and independently while the clinician is in the operatory making money, and we know it's happening. And so I mean, there's a very clear correlation there. But I think if we were to maybe just zoom out a little bit, Mike, and think about just get in the mind of a dentist. I had a call last week with a doctor who bought a very large practice. He's about 6 months in ownership, and we talk a lot about this, and he's pretty overwhelmed. And he said something to me to the effect of, well, maybe I should just sell it and go back to being an associate.
Mhm.
And it's honestly it's a nice practice. We look at the numbers. I think they need to raise fees and really have a hard look at the insurance they're taking, because I think it's all the challenges on the revenue cycle. But we really talk about the leadership, and for this doctor, I think, and it's weird. He's talking to a CPA about this, and I'm telling him, you first off, the diagnosis is the revenue. They're clearly managing cost, but I think the only way he's going to come to work and have that fulfillment, because owning a business is hard and it can be very, very rewarding. But if you feel there's some gaps in this leadership, like what we've been talking about, it can. I have some empathy that can be very overwhelming. That's where I think this dentist is. So we end up talking a lot. We end up talking a lot more about managing people and fixing that third lever, that leadership, rather than just the number. So I think we've had a long discussion on leadership, and I think that's in my opinion the key takeaway, because that's what impacts the actual financial levers you might chat with your CPA about how to make more money. You've got to start with the owner.
Absolutely. Morgan, what I would like to do is we're going to wrap things up here because I think that we're going to do another session together. And what because I know that you have got a great set of insights on associate doctors, right?
Yes.
Doctors that are going to be part of your team but not owners, and doctors that come in and maybe they're going to be future owners or they come in as equity partners. And then there's the point about, I'd love to touch base on how you prepare yourself for that eventual sale. You may now be 20, 30 years into it and you're thinking, okay, I got to get myself ready for that. And you certainly want to, get the not only maximize your income in the process, but also get a good return on the asset that you've created. So let's talk about that in a separate conversation. Does that sound good to you?
You bet.
All right. So the next thing that I want to say is in the episode notes to the viewers that we have with us today, you will be able to have Morgan's contact information. Okay. His firm is EAG, is it?
Eisner Advisory Group, Dental
Yeah.
Advisors.
And they work for dentists throughout the United States, all 50 states. I don't know if there's anybody bigger than you. It doesn't matter to me. You're the first practice that I've come across that in my mind has got it figured out. And I'm saying that not just because you're here, but dentists they need the numbers done without hassle, without stress, at a reasonable fee. And I know your fees are very reasonable. And they need to be presented to the doctor and whoever is also there advising them, could be someone like me, in a way where it's comprehensible. I'm a background in accounting and you're a CPA, so numbers come easy to me. But with dentists, it's got to be put forth in a way where it's easy to absorb, right? And today, in this world of short attention spans, becomes even more important. And
Yes.
you've got numbers and you've got graphics. You've made it super easy, and then you've got the tax planning component. So, ladies and gentlemen that are with me today, just go to the episode notes. You're going to see the quick and easy way to go to get in contact with Morgan. So know that he's here for you, and I know that you are taking on additional clients. So I know
Yes.
that people out there, they will be able to talk to you, correct?
That is absolutely correct. And what you just described is why we have always been and will always remain a very specific niche firm where we're only helping one specific segment, and that's private dental, because that's the only way we can accomplish those goals that you just described. My business partner, my longtime business partner, Courtney, and I still do all initial consultations personally. So if you reach out to us, you'll be talking to us to learn more about your situation and see if perhaps it'd be a good fit.
Wonderful. Well, Morgan, thank you for your time today. Again, guys and gals, ladies and gentlemen, boy, if you're looking for a CPA firm, an accounting firm that's going to do a lot more than getting you some numbers, get a hold of Morgan. This gentleman has his act together. And again, Morgan, thank you for your service. We appreciate that, but I'm also very glad, I know your clients are, that you chose the world of accounting like your dad, because believe me, in dentistry, it's a big need and you're doing a great job of it. So until next time, guys, thanks. See you again.
All right. Thank you, Mike.